The following is a special presentation of the PDF Sports Network.
You know, I'm right. The podcast that uncovers the origin stories of some of the biggest names in sports, media, and entertainment. And Joe, our guest today, we've had many of his colleagues on, but listen, it's not every day that we get to have on a nationally known baseball writer for MLB.com, previously for ESPN and Fangraphs, and the host of the Statcast podcast. He's got more than a decade of digital production experience for some of the biggest brands and companies in the world, including project management and hands-on site development. Joe, let everybody know who we have with us today.
Mike, usually I'm the guy who does the intro, but apparently Nick decided today that he was going to do it. So I'm just going to lead you right in. Our guest today is Mike Petriello. Mike, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hey guys, I can see you found my out-of-date LinkedIn page, so I appreciate that introduction.
Well, I figured it out. What better introduction than to do one written by the guests themselves? So there you go. Maybe it's a little out of date, but that's why we got you on here. We're gonna cover everything here, and it all started when you were a child. So growing up, or at what stage of your life did you decide you wanted to pursue some sort of career path within the sports world?
Well, that's a good question. I didn't get my first full-time job in baseball till I was 35. So there's a certain point where it's like, well, I don't think I'm ever going to actually do this because it feels like an unreasonable dream to set. But I remember when I was, let's see, I went to college. I'm from New Jersey. I went to college in Boston. I moved to New York when I was 26. And I remember right about that time, as I was moving, I was at a wedding and I was talking to one of my best friend's fathers and being like, hey, I'm moving to New York. And he's like, do you have a job? And I said, no. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? I don't know. Maybe I'll try to work in sports. And he kind of laughed at me, like sort of correctly, because I had no path to actually doing that. And then I've always remembered that being like, he was kind of right to say that because I didn't really have a plan at that point. And, fortunately for me, I mean, I like to think hard work, but definitely a lot of good timing. It sort of worked out that way.
So you went to Boston for college. You attended BU. I have a lot of friends who went to BU. Really, really great school for communications. So what did you do when you were there? What did you study specifically? How active were you on campus? And the internship situation and the path that leads ultimately out of BU, I think is a lot easier than some of the other schools in the country, like Northwestern, Michigan, right? So BU is one of those schools. So what did you study? And in terms of internships, did you do anything at that time?
Well, it's funny you say that because you're right about BU. I feel like half of the baseball writers on the East Coast went to Boston U at some point, like Anthony DiComo and Mark Feinstein and a whole bunch of other people. The thing is, most, if not all of them, went to BU to go to journalism school or communications. I actually didn't. I have a history degree, which I guess I'm not applying that much. I mean, I guess it's good for remembering facts and trying to explain why things happened. That's applicable in some sense, but no, I went to BU. I was in the College of Arts and Science, which is more like the general path as opposed to anything specific. And I worked at the college radio station. I did stuff like that. But I was not in the communications school. I didn't go to journalism school, anything like that. I enjoyed history, but I never really had a career path in history. It was sort of what you picked when they're like, you have to pick a major. And so I already had a bunch of credits, and that's kind of what I did. I did get an internship at NESN, so the New England Sports Network, which they do Red Sox games and the Bruins games and hockey, and they still do. In 2003, which turned out to be a pretty good time to be around Fenway Park. So I got pretty lucky with that. I needed a professor to help me with the application because they wouldn't let you do it if it wasn't like for credit or whatever. And I didn't really have a great, mentor in that sense. And I kind of walked around the department and I saw a professor with a Red Sox tie. And I'm like, well, this is the man I need to go talk to. And he helped me out. And I was very fortunate to get the internship. It was like a great experience, both baseball and hockey being around the park that year, but it didn't lead to anything. Like I ended up getting a totally unrelated job at what was a video on demand startup that no longer exists called Gotuit, which was actually kind of ahead of its time. It would have worked better in the streaming era, it didn't work so great on the old cable set top boxes. But the short version of that is it was trying to do like a pardon interruption thing, like the lists on the side, and you could like go exactly to whatever part you want. It's great for now, didn't work out so great in 2004 or whatever. But I did that for like 3.5 years. And it was great for, learning stuff like Photoshop and some video editing and some project management and stuff like that. And it was sports related in the sense we cut a lot of football highlights and hockey highlights. And then at the end of 3 years out of college, I was like, I'm sick of the job. I broke up with my girlfriend. I think it's time to make a change. And that's when I left Boston and moved to New York City.
So your stuff that you did in Boston there with obviously with NESN first, your first kind of like professional experience, stage managing, Scorebox operating, and then your stuff with Gotuit Media, technical production. How much do you think that helps? Maybe not specifically just yourself, but anybody who ends up doing like on-air work or articles, just to know like how much goes into the back end of things just to get things to look all polished up when the viewer is watching or the reader is reading.
Yeah, that's a great point. So when I was at NESN, I did like a bunch of tape blogging, which I'm not sure if is even still a thing these days. But one of the things I did was, so before the game, they would always have these pregame interviews on the field with some of the local sports writers from Boston Globe, Herald, whatever. And so I would help set that up. You set up a couple folding chairs in front of the dugout. You make sure the players coming off the field for BP don't run in front of the camera and everything. Help the camera guys like set up and clean up the gear and everything. And it's like the kind of down and dirty work that you don't see a lot of, but it's like vitally important. If those guys and women aren't out there doing that, you don't have TV. So I'm happy I got that experience just to kind of see from the ground up, like, how does TV happen? What little things have to go into it, just as simple as making sure when you're a college senior and you're trying to tell David Ortiz no, that you can't walk in front of this camera right now, it's a little overwhelming, but if you don't do it, then the shot gets ruined, so you learn real quick.
Yeah, gotta be rough to tell Big Papi what to do. But at that time, no World Series yet, so what are you gonna do? You had the authority there. But you make that move to New York. You're touching on earlier, you didn't have any plans. So how did you ultimately get that, that position to do the broadcast engineering for Major League Baseball Advanced Media?
Yeah, this part gets kind of dumb, and I wouldn't recommend this career path, I think, to anybody the way I did it. I got that job off of Craigslist, and it was a part-time remote job. It wasn't broadcast engineering yet. It was in what's called the traffic department, which is basically MLB Advanced Media, or at least what it was 15 years ago. They did a lot more than just baseball. They're taking in feeds in the off season for ice skating and tennis and soccer, all kinds of others, of concerts. They streamed a lot of concerts. And essentially the traffic department schedules all that and makes sure that the right feed goes into the right, feed on the website. You don't call up a Dodger game and get ice skating, something like that. So I did that for a year, and it was a really good experience. But it was a little tough for me because when I moved from Boston to New York, I didn't have a job, so I didn't have an apartment. So I went back to my parents on the Jersey Shore for a couple months, and that was a rough back and forth to Manhattan every day. And eventually I moved into the city. And there's a funny story I'll tell you in a second about who I moved in with. But the job was cool. Like, it was a great experience. It was great to be in the building. But it was like entirely nights and weekends, which is how sports works, and that's fine. But broadcast engineering wasn't really what my path was going to be. I think I moved over from the traffic department to the engineering department at some point, and I do remember one night it's like 2:30 in the morning, and I'm laying on my back cutting Cat 5 cables to set up like a new record, and I'm like, this is a really like important job, and I don't think it's for me. So I left. With maybe the world's worst timing, because then the economy exploded in 2008 and made it hard to get a job. And then I played bass. I went on tour with the band for a little bit just because I had nothing to do. And then I got like a job that I stayed at for like 5.5 years in PR. As you can see, I've been in a lot of different places. They have not all been baseball, but some of the skills have sustained to now. Like, I feel like I never wanted to be just a writer when I got here. I wanted to, put some of these other skills to use. And I hopefully have been able to do that.
So where down the Jersey Shore?
Brick, right by Point Pleasant, if you know.
Right by Point Pleasant. Yeah, of course I know where that is. I know that area
Joe
all too
frequents
well.
the Jersey Shore quite often during the summer.
Oh, you
And,
got a good, strong Italian last name, so isn't that surprising?
yeah, from Asbury to
Okay.
Bowlmor to
Yep.
Point Pleasant to Tom's River. I know where Brick is. I know where. So who was the person that you moved in with?
Okay, so I also got a Craigslist room in New York City in Hell's Kitchen, and it was one room open in a room of 4 people. And so when I moved in, here are the 3 other guys. One of them is Chris Mannix, who is now a pretty well-known
Ooh.
boxing and basketball writer. One of them is a guy named Mike Smith, who has for years worked for the Knicks as one of their head scouts slash data guys. And then the third was a guy named Jim Sullivan, who at the time was like an investment banker or whatever, but for years since then has worked for the New York Rangers in their data department. And I feel like someday someone's going to write a book about like, wait, the 4 of you guys just all kind of live together. And that was really funny at the time.
Hell of an apartment there, that's for sure. So you're playing bass. You're going on tour a little bit. What was that experience like? And if you had to assemble a band of MLB.com employees, obviously it would be you, Sarah Langs, Jason Bernard, but who else is going to be in that band? And can anybody sing, or would you all be getting booed off the stage?
Well, I got a really nice baseball themed guitar from Corey Schwartz, who's worked here forever. He's a good guitar player. Not an MLB.com employee, but I know Jason Benetti can sing. I've heard him sing. He's a baseball guy who can sing. It probably wouldn't be that hard. I bet you there's baseball drummers I don't know about.
I was gonna ask about Chris because I met Chris at Marist when I went. So when I went, we started developing this place called the Sports Center of Communication, the Center for Sports Communications, and he was one of our guests, and he was great. And at the time, I think he was still writing about the NBA, right? He was still Celtics writer. So how was he living with him?
It was fine. He wasn't there a lot because he did a lot of traveling, following our basketball and boxing. And then I think it was only about a year. And then he saved up enough to move out and get his own place. And then about a year after that, I moved in with my now wife. So it was a fun moment in time, but it wasn't that long.
No, of course. But yeah, still, Nick is right. That's a great room for down the line. A lot of great stories. So you ended up working at Ketchum as a senior digital producer. How did that opportunity come about? Who approached you about that?
I think it was I was signed up with a job recruiter. So they were like the middleman between people looking for jobs and people looking for employees. It's funny now because the MLB office moved a year or two ago. So now it's right across the street from Radio City Music Hall, but it's also on the same block. I worked at that place for 5 years. So it's kind of funny to still be in the same place. That was a great experience. It paid well, and it was really great to learn, how to manage a project, how to hire developers and designers. I got to work with some really big clients like FedEx, MasterCard, and all sorts of stuff. And it was good. And then that's when my side gig of doing baseball writing started to amp up a little bit. But also there was a point where the job turned into almost entirely like healthcare and pharmaceutical websites and going through like endless regulatory garbage. And I thought, 5 years of that was about enough of that. So that's when I moved on from that after a while.
So you're also staying, in there with MLB Advanced Media. You're doing the Gameday monitoring, senior Gameday monitor at that time. Something Joe is kind of familiar with because he did some of that in Secaucus in the recent years. But that's a pretty grinding job there. A lot of the late nights and stuff. But what was that experience like for you? And was that like a good way for you to kind of just stay attached with MLB?
I'm glad you brought that up. I kind of forgot that I did that for a while, but yes, that was a really good side gig with a lot of really great people, some of whom I'm still friends with today. And essentially it was quality assurance. And it was specifically like, here are the games that you are assigned to. Make sure the audio sounds good. Make sure the video looks good. Make sure you're not getting a Red Sox video with Yankee audio over it or something like that. Just, the kind of stuff that's not like hard to do, but if nobody does it, then you can't catch mistakes and then people lose their minds over. So that was a pretty good gig. And, I did that for a couple of years. And then I'm trying to remember why I stopped doing that. I think when I quit Ketchum, I went to be an editor at Sports on Earth, which was also an MLB owned property. And they're like, you can't do both of these things at the same time. So I picked editing.
We're kindred spirits because for a long time I've been doing media management. So for the most part, I've been doing it with NHL.com. So I started where it was MLBAM, and then it became BAMTech, and then it was absorbed into Disney streaming, and they use that for other things such as ESPN Plus, Disney Plus, right? But when you work in Secaucus, what happens is I was working upstairs, and all the baseball people are downstairs, right? And there's kind of overlap, right? So it's like if hockey needs help during hockey season, they'll pull baseball people up. Baseball needs help during baseball season, they'll pull hockey people down. So I was one of those people that they pulled down, and I got to do media management stuff. So obviously monitoring emails, team emails, league emails, right? But for the most part, I was an RTH here, right? Which is when in baseball, when you get those games where it's like 10-4, and I've done games where I've had 22 runs in a game, and I know people who have they did the Braves Marlins game last year where it was that 30-run game, right? You know how bad that grind is on a night like that, where you get stuck with one of those games and you're like, I'm the unlucky one, right?
Yeah, there's been a couple of those, especially when it's a West Coast game that's like rain delayed. There's a couple of those, and I can't remember where, Oakland or whatever, but it's like, oh, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I still have to drive back down the Jersey Shore, and I'm supposed to work tomorrow. Like, what am I going to do?
Supposed to come back in at the same time. Yeah, there would be nights I wouldn't get home until 3:15, 3:30 in the morning, and there have been nights where I got home after 4. So obviously, your drive was a little longer than mine because Nick and I are from Staten Island. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, for sure. I mean, at the time I didn't have kids, didn't have a wife. That made it a lot easier. But yeah, it's a rough way to try to get any of those things if you want to try to have like a life outside the job, and half the job is just commuting to the job too.
Yeah. And so you started doing baseball writing on the side, right? So we're finally going to get to do the baseball writing portion of this. So you did freelance for various outlets, and you're an editorial producer for Sports on Earth, right? So the process of doing freelancing, it's difficult only because when you write and you try to do stuff like that, and you try to build a name for yourself, and you try to build a portfolio of everything, it's difficult because you don't make that much money, right? And you have to stay on top of everything, and you have to try to write every day, right? So what was it like at that period of time, and what was it like being an editorial producer for Sports on Earth?
That was a pretty good job because I already knew a lot about website production, right? But you're not just editing the words, you're also making the stories look pretty and make sure the links all work. So that was a really good job. Like, I enjoyed it there. I met a lot of good people when I was there, and then the site sort of collapsed, and we all got laid off, and so that happened. But then I never wrote for them, right? I was only like producing for them at the time. I was writing for Fangraphs. So the way that worked was, I was a Dodger fan when I was a kid, growing up in New Jersey, which I know is weird, but I was on the Dodgers when I was in T-ball, and they won the World Series when I was 7. And it kind of goes. I'm raising a Rockies fan in Brooklyn, so like, who knows what kids are fans of anybody. He liked purple. I wish he'd pick a different team. It's a rough team to follow. But anyway, yeah. So then, like, when I went to college, I kind of stopped following the Dodgers a little bit because they traded Mike Piazza, who was my favorite player, and I was busy in Boston college and everything. And this is sort of a long way to get to the question you actually asked. But anyway, when I was in Boston, I started following the Dodgers again around 2004, like when they made the Brad Penny, Paul LaDuca trade. And I started reading Dodger blogs and posting on Dodger blogs. And that's when I started my own on the side, thanks in part to the awful last place 2005 Dodgers, which was the first time I ever got to watch them every night because my roommate at the time bought extra innings so he could watch Padres games. And it was an account for the house, not for him. So I got to watch it too. And I'm like, oh, Vin Scully every night. This is great. Anyway, I started writing my own blog in 2007, and that kind of got me these opportunities. So at the point in time you're talking about, I was writing for Fangraphs like 3 times a week on the side, I think, and then also contributing to ESPN and working for Sports on Earth, which was fine at the time, but that was also the point in time where it's like, oh, we're going to start a family. I might need better health insurance than this. And then Sports on Earth collapsed anyway, which sort of expedited that.
And then you became a digital content manager for Bowlmor and the AMF. I know you worked a lot of jobs that we got to cover here.
I know. Yeah, that was right after, probably right after my son was born, and Sports on Earth had kind of ended, and I needed a better more reliable job. So it was kind of the same thing as it had been working for the digital PR agency. I just kind of managed all their websites, and bowling was whatever, but the office was in Times Square, which I used to live in Hell's Kitchen, which is an easy walk, and we had paid decently. It was a job. It was not a career. It was a 9 to 5 job. And it was great for what it was. And then after that, the opportunity at MLB arose, and I bowled my way out of there as quickly as I could.
Did you get to bowl for free? Was there any perks with the job?
Yeah, probably. I mean, they had bowling parties, but there's only so much bowling I could do.
All right, fair enough. So you bowl your way out of there, you strike on full-time MLB Advanced Media, baseball writer, stats analyst. And this is kind of where, the StatCast stuff is exploding. And you're one of the people at the forefront of that, one of the faces. So for this role here, was this something where you kind of pitched this? Was you come for something else and morphed into this? How did this role come to be?
When I was writing at Fangraphs, they had a content sharing partnership with ESPN. So once a week, I would send into ESPN an article, like mostly stats facing article that they might use. And that was great. And then after a while, my editor there quit, and he went and worked at MLB. And I had a different editor at ESPN. And then so 2015 StatCast comes online. And about 3 weeks into the season, I'll never forget it. I was on a vacation with my wife. We were in San Francisco, and we were standing out on one of the long piers, like in the middle of the bay, and my phone rings, and it's my old editor from ESPN, and he says, "Hey, we got all this StatCast stuff, and I'm not sure we actually have anyone here who's like really equipped to write about it." That editor is now Matt Myers, who is one of my good friends and podcast co-host and everything. He's like, "Do you want to come write for us?" And it's like, "Sure." It was freelance for that year. This is when I was working at the bowling place. So that's what 2015 was, the first year StatCast. And then in early 2016, he was able to help me get on full-time. So that kind of turned in from a part-time job into a full-time job. And I mean, that's been the full-time gig ever since 2016 is working at MLB. So, it was originally like, hey, we need someone to explain StatCast stuff. We don't know how to contextualize these numbers, all this stuff. And obviously it's not just me. There's like a million other people here who data quality engineers and data scientists and all other writers, all sorts of people. And that has kind of spawned a lot of opportunities. I mean, like the ESPN shows, for like a year before any of that was even brought up, we were working with one of their top producers who is interested in like, how do I put this stuff on TV? How do I explain this to anybody? So that's just like a relationship that grew out of that. And then it was like, hey, we're going to do some StatCast shows. Do you want to come do it? I'm like, okay, cool. That's kind of a lot of the connections that paid off that way.
So what was it like for you doing those StatCast broadcasts? What kind of prep work do you put into that? Because obviously, you got to bring all your stats from StatCast, but then you also actually have to watch what's going on in the game.
A lot of prep work for sure. I end up with like a 35-page Google Doc of just stuff, because it's like I'm not a naturally talented broadcaster. I'm not going to bring broadcasting school experience. I'm not Boog Shambi or Jason Benetti or anything like that. So I better at least know what I'm talking about. And if I'm going to do that, my wife is like, "Oh, all the players. This shouldn't be that hard." And it's like, I can't just say like, "Hey, Mike Trout's good." Like everybody knows that. You got to be able to put some context to it, show some leaderboards, work with the producers. So all those shows just took a ton of effort, and like they're super fun. They're some of my best friends, I think, for life have come from working on those groups. Like Jason Benetti and I are super tight. Eduardo is one of my favorite people in the world. Our producer, Andy Jacobson, is a good friend of mine. Like that was so cool. There's like the opportunity to do that was like beyond anyone's wildest dreams.
How much fun is it for you to do the MLB Network studio shows? And what do you remember about the first time you were approached about doing one of those? Was there any hesitation for you at all to be doing television work?
The first time I was on MLB Network was probably like 10 years ago. It was this show they had before MLB Now existed called Clubhouse Confidential. And that was definitely nervous because it wasn't the first time I was on TV, but that was the first time I was in like a real TV studio, wearing a suit and like wearing makeup and all that stuff. So that was probably the most nerve-wracking show I've ever done. And it was great because like Brian Kenny's the friendliest guy on the planet. And but yeah, I definitely remember that, like trying to remember what it was I had prepared to talk about and just like get the words out of your mouth and not sound like a total idiot. Like it's second nature now, but the first time you do it, it's scary.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. But BK is great, but he's always going to bring his energy and stuff. So you got to
Yeah.
be ready. So when do you, because you're always on the show every year, when do you start preparing your top 10 list for the Shredder to go up against Brian Kenny and your colleagues in the Shredder? When do you start doing that research, and what's your thought process behind making those lists?
Usually the shows are taped like the second week of January or so, because they want to get at least through like the primary part of off the winter hot stove, free agents and trades and stuff like that. And I don't know if people know that they tape all 10 of our segments in one day, or 8 segments. I can't remember how now, but anyway, we do them all like 5-hour block in a row, and then they slice them up and air them at times. That's a lot of work too, because it's not that hard to make a list. But then you got to be prepared, because then Brian will say, "Oh, you ranked this guy number 6 and I have him number 5. Why do you like him worse than the other guy?" And I can't be like, "Oh, hold on, I'm going to go look up his baseball reference page and think about that for a second." You got to have at least like one thing in mind, and you can hold like a page of notes or whatever. But I probably start thinking about it, I don't know, certainly after the World Series. And then usually I'll do a preliminary list without even looking up stats. I'll just do like, okay, here's off the top of my head what I think my top 15 shortstops will be. Right. And then I'll go through each guy and I'll be like, oh, actually, he's probably a little too high, a little bit too low. And a lot of times I'll do that over Christmas break, because, get a week off of work, got time to kill. And then, you submit them from that and do it in January. And then it's kind of fun to argue with people about for a while.
Right now, I think the hardest category for you, and usually as most years, is the starting pitcher. So for you, any thoughts on how you're going to qualify that? Because a lot of the great starting pitchers this season, they're either coming off of injury or they've gotten injured this season. So how much does an injury history play into your ranking?
A lot. So 2 years ago, I had DeGrom second and Shane Bieber first, right? Because I didn't trust DeGrom to stay healthy, and Mets fans lost their absolute minds. And he didn't stay healthy. But then he pitched so well last year, like better than anybody I'd ever seen. And I was like, okay, well, he's so good, I got to rank him number 1. And then he missed the first half of the season, like more time than I thought he was going to miss. So it's a great question. I'm not sure there's a great answer, because what people forget is it's not ranking the top 10 of the previous season. Like you're trying to project ahead, like who do I think will be the top 10 for this upcoming season? And that's where it always gets a little bit tricky.
Right. And at that point, DeGrom is the most talented. It's about who's going to have the best overall body of work. Right. And that includes being able to stay healthy and have more innings and accumulate all that stuff. Right. That's pretty fair. But I want to talk to you about the upcoming rule changes, because MLB is it's America's pastime. It's an old timers game. It's a very purist game. Anything related to changing anything about the game, nobody ever likes, right? But get a couple of rules here. The shift is gone, right? And while I don't necessarily dislike the defensive shift, I can see the argument for having designated positions and having those players stay in the designated zone regarding those positions. So understandable, bigger bases, more for a safety reason, and the pitch clock, which is something that's been talked about here for years now. So what are your thoughts on the upcoming rule changes? Do you agree or disagree with any of them, from a personal opinion perspective? Because we all have different opinions, obviously, on the rules stuff. Do you think they'll eventually benefit baseball in the long run?
I think of those 3 things, I guess I have 3 different opinions on them. Love the pitch clock. Love it. I went to, if you guys have ever been to a Brooklyn Cyclones game, all right, one of my favorite things to do, take my son to. They have it this year. And like the last time we went, I was like, this is great. Like I'm so excited about that. People are going to wonder how they lived without it. The bases I'm indifferent on, like, fine. I don't think it's going to make that big a difference. I have no strong opinion on the slightly larger bases. And the shift ban, I don't even like to call it that. It's not really a shift ban. You can still put the shift on if you want to. I've hated the idea of a shift ban for years. I've tweeted about it like a million times, and I still have some concerns about it. But the more I thought through it, the more I thought it was interesting. And someone tweeted at me, and I thought this is a really interesting way to put it. It's not banning the shift. It's just making it a lot riskier to do. Like it's a risk reward thing. So, if Joey Gallo or Anthony Rizzo or one of those lefty guys comes up you can still have 3 guys on the right side of the infield. Like that is not legislated out. You can still do that. But since you have to have 2 guys on the left side, that means one of those 3 guys has to be your left fielder, you know? So now you've opened up a huge spot in left field. Can Joey Gallo go there? I don't know. I don't know if he can or will. But it makes it riskier. So I think that's interesting. Like the only thing you really can't do is have a 4-man outfield, which I don't know that anybody cares about losing that. That's not that big a deal to me. And you can't have, you know, the hard overshift where you have just one infielder on the left side. And that's like the lowest positioning bar to clear. I think it doesn't actually, it's not as egregious as people think it is. It's not going to change that much. I'm looking forward to getting a lot of content out of people being shocked that the strikeout rate doesn't change because of this next year, because they all think it will. And it's like, no, when you want the strikeout rate to drop, you have to stop pitchers from throwing 105 miles an hour with movement on it. That's not what this does.
I think strikeouts are here to stay. That's for sure. So
I have another question. One more question next. Sorry about that. If there was any type of rule change that you would implement, what would do you have any idea about that?
I think some of these have already been discussed. It just between, you know, the COVID sometimes and some other stuff, it hasn't really put into place that hard yet. I think you really got to put stricter limits on the number of pitchers you can use either in a game or on a roster, right? If you want starters to go more deeply into a game, then you can't have 75 relievers backing them up. So that's the first thing I would do. The second thing I always answer to that question is the pitch clock. And now we're going to get the pitch clock. So I'll be excited to see that. I think a lot of that hesitation people have to the rules is they're like, well, this is a new rule change we've never had before. And it's like, yeah, but the intention is to make baseball look like it did, 30 years ago. And you can't just assume that the players and teams are going to do that on their own. It's not their business to make it aesthetically pleasing. It's their business to win, so make the rules and let everybody operate within those rules. Like I'm pleased that a sport that has historically been as, stodgy as baseball is kind of being a little more forward facing with these things. I mean, even PitchCom, the fact that PitchCom got approved and got put into use like as quickly as it did was kind of stunning to me. For the most part, it's been a success, so I think that's cool.
Yeah, a real change I would want to see is aluminum bats for the home run derby. I think that would be nice. But it's scary though as well. But how do you feel about the roster sizes? Obviously, they're a little more expanded now, but I'm with you on the million pitchers and whatnot. So I kind of like the idea of you could have, a big roster, but you're going to have the taxi squad and you have to list your active pitchers for the night. And you could have extras inactive or whatever. But what do you think is the ideal roster size? Because I feel like even though it's expanded, these teams are still ending up with short benches because they're going so heavy on the pitchers.
Yeah, I do think, and they are doing this, you have to put limits not just on the roster size, but on the number of pitchers. All right. So I know that the delayed spring training this year kind of messed that up because they started off with a 14 pitcher maximum, and then it went down to 13. I mean, if it was up to me, I'd say 11, right? I don't know if that's realistic. Maybe it's got to be 12, but nobody needs a 13, 14, 15 man pitching staff at any point. And the other thing that you have to do to account for that is you've got to limit the amount of minor league transactions you can make. And they've done that a little bit with the maximum of options. But if you constantly have the bottom 3 or 4 spots on your pitching staff churning up and down for fresh arms every night, that is not really a pitcher maximum. You're just picking 14 of 19 pitchers every single night, and it's the different 14. So I think positive steps have been made in that regard. I think it should probably be more, but I also would say because you made some pretty big rule changes, I am hesitant to try to make too many things happen at the same time, because then it's really hard to evaluate which one's actually working or not, So I wouldn't do 3 rule changes and then also the roster changes I would want to make. And then I think people get frustrated though, because then it's something new every year. In some way, there's no winning here.
For sure. Where do you stand on the Shohei Ohtani should always be MVP debate?
Shohei Ohtani should always be the MVP unless someone else is having a historically great year, right? Last year, I said this on Twitter the other day, Vlad Jr., who was the second place finisher, he had a phenomenal year, a really great year. But it was the kind of year you see somewhat often, right? It's not different than a Mike Trout year or, Mookie Betts here. Like we've seen great years like that. So Ohtani won unanimously. And Ohtani is not worse this year. I mean, he's a better pitcher and a slightly worse hitter, and he's still having a great year. And if it was Aaron Judge having a Vlad year, this isn't even a conversation. But he's not. He's going to break one of the most hallowed records in baseball history. And even aside from that, he's going to have like a top 10 hitting season overall of the past like 70 years, you know? So the way I look at it is I can make a really good case for Ohtani to win MVP. And I can make a really good case for Judge to win MVP. And there's no wrong answer. Pick either one you want. It's fine. Just don't diminish the other guy. Like, don't tell me how great Judge is by telling me the things that Ohtani does wrong, because that's garbage. And I know that no one will ever agree on this last point. I don't care that the Yankees are good and the Angels are bad. I don't care about that. There's nothing Ohtani could do more to fix that. If you gave Ohtani Clay Holmes and Garrett Cole, and guess what? The Yankees would be worse and the Angels would be better.
Well, I think once Felix Hernandez won the Cy Young, all that stuff went out the window of the record, win-loss record and whatnot. Last point on baseball here. If in your eyes, in your opinion here, if you're looking to the offseason here, you're a big money team. Maybe we talk about like the Giants, or we could say the Dodgers or the Mets. And there's going to be, two huge people available. Obviously, Judge, the free agent, Ohtani, probably going to get moved via trade. Which way are you going? Because either way, you're going to have to pay a lot of money. But if you go to Ohtani, you got to trade for him and give up more prospects. Probably going to pay him $600 million, where Judge is going to get a little less money. You don't have to pay, but you're not getting the pitching. So who would you pursue if you were one of those teams?
That's a really good question. I don't know that the Angels will trade Ohtani this winter, just because I don't know what the ownership change. Like, I don't know when that's going to be finalized. That's a tough question to answer. I think I'm going to take the coward's way out, and I'm going to give you two different answers here. If you're asking me which player I want going forward, I want Ohtani. Versus paying a guy versus paying a guy and also giving up a bow.
Fair enough. All right, Mike, it's what in your life, your career was your I'm right moment? Pursue something, you ask somebody for advice, they said, you know what, that's you will see. Ultimately, you will see why it is right.
Yeah. At my friend's wedding with my dad. I mean, and he's not wrong. Again, and a lot. And the number one thing I say is that you can't just want to work in sports. Something you do that makes you unique or stand out. And that's, I guess, not the answer to your question, but that's what it worked out for me. But that's what I always remember. Yeah.
That's all that matters.
It's probably the very cool things I've done. It's all the cool things I've done. It's probably the very end of the Cubs Rockies wildcard game in 2018. Like, that was the first. It wasn't the first Statcast show because we'd done the home run derby, but it was the first game, not a derby. And it was a playoff game, and it was in Wrigley Field, and it was 13 innings. And it went so well. I was so worried about whether we could actually do this for a game, and it went so well. And Jason Benetti, who is an experienced play-by-play guy who knows what he's doing, is trying to do his game wrap up. Hey, what'd you see from this game? And I said, whatever about whatever. And then at the end, I said, Jason, that was just about the most fun I've ever had in my entire life. And he just laughed at me because he's like, who says that? That's not the answer you're expecting to get. But that's the moment I remember as being, that worked out so well. And I'm so glad I got to do that.
And we are glad that you did this with us, Mike. We appreciate it. What we do here is we always give our guests the last words. So if there's anything else you would like to share, if there's anything else you would like to promote, right now the floor is all yours. We wish you the best moving forward. Hopefully there will be more Rockies playoff games in the future for your son. You got to see the Dodgers here the last couple of years in a championship here. So we wish for that for your son, hopefully down the line. But again, if there's anything else you'd like to share, promote, go right ahead. Thanks again for doing this with us.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, guys. We got a lot of interesting stuff and new metrics and stuff coming out over the winter. We'll have position player arm strength and some new catcher stuff and some bat speed stuff. And so, follow me, Mike_Petriello, and MLB at MLB.com will be all the good stuff, baseballsavant.com especially.
All right, Mike, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. So that's going to do it here for this episode of You Know Him Right, for our very special guest, Mike Petriello, from my co-host, Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know Him Right.